So you've been looking to automate your business, and you're not sure which of these work management or project management or app builder tools are going to help you actually automate it. Well, over the last 3 years, I've helped hundreds of businesses choose the right tools for them and get them implemented and automated in their business. In this video, I'm going to rank the platforms with the top automation features so you can decide which one is the right fit for you. Now, before we dive into the tools, there are 3 automation concepts I want you to be aware of. Number 1 is that when it comes to conditional logic, it's helpful if you can have both and or conditions. A lot of platforms only give you and conditionality. But what if you wanted to trigger a notification if the status is overdue or if the customer health is red? In that case, having or conditions makes your platform more flexible. The second thing you'll want to take a look at is branching logic. Now, a lot of platforms let you have multiple conditions and you can chain together multiple actions. But what many don't let you do is actually have different branching logic, different condition paths, each with their own unique actions. So for example, if total billings is over 80%, then we want to send a notification. But if billings are between 50 and 80%, then we want to assign a task to the project manager. Having multiple condition branches means you can group more of that logic in a single automation. And the final concept is around webhooks. We have 2 different kinds of webhooks, inbound webhooks and outbound webhooks. Inbound webhooks are when some event happens outside of our system that signals our core system to kick off an automation. An example would be if we had a deal that closed in our CRM and it sent a notification that kicked off our project creation inside our project management tool. And an outbound webhook or a call API is the opposite. It's when something happens in our core system and we want it to send a notification to a different outside platform. So for example, if our project closes in our core work management software and we want that to send a signal into QuickBooks to automatically create an invoice. So when I talk about webhooks in these platforms, it gives you more power to integrate with other outside systems. Let's go ahead and dive into the tools. I'll be covering some of the things I like and dislike about each platform, and we'll talk about their triggers or what kicks off these automations, their business logic, as well as their actions. So the first one we have here is ClickUp. Now, ClickUp has a lot of different triggers. A lot of them are related to different updates in the system. If we scroll down, we can see that we have a number of different integrations, not as many as some, but some more than others. A couple of the common ones would be if we have a Google Calendar, if there's an event created or updated. We can also have a Slack message that's posted or reaction added. That's a pretty unique one, which is cool. But despite those integrations, we don't have those inbound webhooks, so we can't easily set up our own integrations in the platform. One of the things where ClickUp is really strong is where this task or subtask is created. We can actually choose which data source we want to reference or actually have it go by. So for example, we could say only if it's created through a form or the API. Now, this is some pretty advanced functionality that I don't see in many other platforms at all. Another more advanced thing is if we have a status change, it actually tracks the historic data as well as the new data. Most automation systems are really just concerned about this to value or what it actually ends up being, the new value. But to be able to actually track that old value is pretty cool. Another awesome thing is around their scheduling capabilities. So many tools just say, hey, if it happens every 3 days or every 5 days. But with ClickUp, you have much more granularity over the scheduling. So for example, it almost feels like Google Calendar type logic if you choose custom and you could say, yeah, I want this to run every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Now, when it comes to the logic, we can create multiple conditions. We can keep adding them here, but it's only if the condition is true, meaning we don't have that or logic, we only have the and logic. We also don't have branching logic. You can create multiple different actions that take place in sequence, but again, this is just one series of trigger plus its conditions and then multiple actions. You don't actually have different branches. One of the most powerful conditions I've come across is this time and status, which they have that you can enable via a ClickUp. So to actually be able to say, hey, we spent a certain amount of time, it's now past that amount of time for a particular status is pretty rare functionality. Now, on the downside for logic, we can't search for specific tasks or operate in a loop and actually go through a list of tasks. On the actions, again, we have a few integrations, like we can send a text message. That's an interesting one. Or we can send messages via Slack. They've got quite a few communication ones within their own platform as well. And we are able to call a webhook externally as well. So overall, ClickUp has really strong trigger logic. It's got really solid actions, but its business logic is a little bit lacking. So we'll go ahead and give this an A. Next up, we have Asana. Let's take a look at some of its triggers. By the way, when I mentioned CRUD operations, we're talking about create, read, update, and delete. There's a lot of these that just happen on create or update, pretty standard kinds of things. So most of these triggers will be pretty standard in the system. Their scheduling functionality isn't quite as advanced as ClickUp's, but you can see when a date is coming up. They do support inbound webhooks for your own custom automations, and they do have a handful of integrated actions. On the logic side for our conditions, they do support that and or logic. There's also an AI conditional check, and this is pretty crazy to me. A lot of different platforms have AI steps. It makes a call to the LLM for an action. But this is the only one I've seen that actually has the conditional logic that can do AI functionality. And Asana is able to do full branching logic. So you can have different condition paths and then have each of those have their own sets of actions. The only downside on the logic is that there's no finding of tasks and then looping and iterating through them. The actions are pretty standard and not very sophisticated. I do like the ability to add comments and add or remove collaborators. And we do have quite a few integrated actions. This list is longer than many other tools, although they all kind of tend to be the same type of software, either productivity or other project management related. The one part that bugs me is that if you want to make that external API call or webhook, then you have to use a third-party solution that's run by an Asana service provider. So that's especially crazy for me if your data is going from Asana to random person over here, then to Zapier, then to another tool. That's a huge chain, not very performant, and I don't love that they're handling my data. So Asana doesn't have the most powerful actions and triggers. I don't like the fact that you have to use that third party for the outbound webhooks, but you do have inbound webhooks and you have good conditional logic and branching. So I'm a little bit torn on this between an A and a B, but I think I'm going to give them a B overall. Next up, we have Airtable. Let's talk about their triggers. We've got quite a few to choose from. Most of them are CRUD-oriented. We do have that inbound webhook received. This one's also kind of cool. You can have when email received and have a mail hook, so you could have an email come in to actually trigger the automation. When it comes to scheduling, this is not really their strength. You can say, oh, every so many days at a certain time, but it's not as powerful as ClickUp. One of the things I really don't like about Airtable is that a lot of the business logic, you have to create a ton of additional formula fields and then use that logic inside of the automation rather than actually inputting the logic in the automation. So for example, for date fields, if you want to take today's date and add 3 days to it, well, now you're creating all sorts of additional fields to be able to actually insert data dynamically. Some really powerful functionality that we have is that we can find records and then we can actually iterate through that list, this repeating group. So we're going to be looping through just like you would in code for each of these items, then you can do certain actions. We do have conditional logic with and or statements, and we do have branching logic as well to have one condition and its own set of actions and a second condition and its own set of actions. Now, Airtable's actions are where the real power comes in, and that's because you can actually run a script with JavaScript and create your own custom logic. This is where we could insert webhooks as well. And then when it comes to generating with AI, what you can do is you can actually generate structured data. So you can get information from the LLM, but then you can plug that data into the actual workflow. And that's way more powerful than a lot of other tools where all you can simply do is like, hey, write me a message about whatever in my tone of voice. That's not certainly as powerful. Yes, it's generative, but when we can actually do stuff with structured data, that is much more powerful. There are some integrated actions, but there aren't as many as some others. But again, because we have that scripting ability to call webhooks, that opens a lot of doors for us. So overall, the power of the logic and the scripting, that's going to put Airtable into the S tier. Next up, we have Notion. Notion's triggers are pretty limited. We have any property edited. That's basically any field that's updated. We have pages or essentially records when they're added. Note that we don't have any inbound webhooks, nor do we have any integrated triggers. Now, what's interesting here is we could actually create multiple triggers. So we could go page added and add a second trigger as well about if the task name is populated. And these properties essentially let us to set our conditional logic here. And with those triggers, this is our and or logic. We can say essentially all or any, and or. We don't have branching logic here for our actions, but in the actions, one of the things that's pretty interesting is that we can define variables. So here we have a whole pretty robust formula editor to be able to define our logic. So if we want to calculate which kind of record, we want to identify the ID for that, we can do all of that directly from within formulas. So for those of you who use Excel, this is going to feel very familiar. Once we define variables, then we can do other actions like sending notifications. We can send a webhook, so we have that available in our actions. And we can make our updates or create new records. Edit pages in essentially gives us our looping ability. We can choose all of the different records in a collection to be able to apply that logic to if we wanted to, say, update a property or field against all of those different pages. I'm a little bit on the fence about Notion given their lack of triggers, not many integrated actions, but overall some of the looping functionality that puts it a little bit more advanced than some others. So overall, let's give it a B. Monday.com is really interesting in the fact that they have these automations or integrations, and there's hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them to be able to choose from. So on one hand, you get lots of different options. On the other hand, the logic that you can create yourself is pretty weak. So as we scroll down, we can see a bunch of recommended actions about things like email and productivity. And then up at the top, we can also create our own from scratch. And the thing that I think drives me the craziest about this is that the different recipes or templates, some of the logic available in them is more complex than we would get to build ourselves. And I'm not a fan of that. So for some people who say, yeah, I just love a series of very simple automations or integrations that do one specific thing, then I think you're going to love Monday. For the rest of you who are like, hey, I've got my own unique business problems and use cases, then you might not have the best experience. So for triggers, we do have quite a few options. You can see, hey, when we've got updates, things that are updated, the different values in the columns, or we've got scheduling oriented when a date arrives or every certain time period. But basically, these are pretty standard CRUD operations, and there are no inbound webhooks. In terms of the conditions, we can add our conditions here, and we've got a handful that we can choose from. But while we can add multiple conditions, we can't have that OR logic. All of the conditions need to be true. We also don't have branching logic, and we can't find and then loop or iterate through items as well. Our actions, we have some interesting options. We've got some AI features. We've got some integrated actions. When we enable those, we can move data between our boards, which I think is a terrible architectural idea, but you can do it. Lots of different AI actions available here. This one I find kind of interesting around time tracking, that you can start and stop your time tracking. And then you do have outbound webhooks, but unfortunately you can't just search for webhooks and do it here in the UI. Instead, we need to click on integrate, and then here we can search for webhooks. From here you can select the webhooks, and then you can use one of these templates to tap into the webhook functionality. So overall, there are a ton of integrated actions. I'm talking way more than almost any other platform. But then you're really reliant on those created recipes or templates. And so for that reason, without our own ability to create very complex automations, I'm giving Monday a C. Next up, we have Coda. When it comes to triggers, Coda keeps it pretty simple. Row change, that's basically we've updated something. We've got time-based, that's our scheduling. We've got form submitted, that's our creation. And we have those external webhooks. And this is something you might find interesting as you've seen these different platforms so far. ClickUp lists tons and tons of different triggers, but when a lot of the triggers are all about updating this field or updating that field or updating this other field, that's really not any different than some of these triggers, which are super simplified. So make sure to look past some of the marketing type functionality around, oh, we have hundreds of triggers, when in reality, a lot of these platforms do the same thing. Next, we've got our logic, and we can add conditions. And what's really interesting about Coda, both in their logic, their conditions, and in their actions, is that you have this really powerful formula builder. So we can build all complexity of our own business logic with these conditions, where we can reference things about the triggering row or the results of these things, and then use that functionality in our follow-up actions. And so in our actions with the formula builder, we can create our own branching logic, even if we don't have the functional branching logic on a canvas like you might normally expect. If you're not super big into formulas, that's okay too. You can choose these in the UI. Some interesting ones are around their control values. Well, in Coda, you have all these little widgets, you've got sliders, and so you could set the value of that slider. Most other systems, you're just updating data in the database, but here in Coda, we can actually update data on the front end if we want to. The other thing is that we can refresh these pack columns. Well, here's a number of packs. Here are some that come just kind of out of the box, but then you can browse and choose other ones. Many are third-party, some are created in-house. But that gives you all of these integrations and ways to extend the system that then you can tap into that functionality. The one thing I'd say is I do wish we have that outbound webhook that we could just choose from our list rather than being dependent on a third-party pack. So Coda, I don't think is the easiest to use unless you've really used the system quite a bit, but its functionality is really powerful with all that we can do with the packs and with the formulas. And so for that reason, Coda is going to go to the S tier. Next up, we have SmartSuite. Similar to ClickUp, we've got this nice at scheduled time functionality, which we can use essentially like we would with calendar logic. In addition, we have our inbound webhooks, most of the other CRUD operations you'd expect, but we have pretty limited actually supported integrations. With SmartSuite in our conditional logic, we can do that and or logic. And what I really like about SmartSuite over Airtable in some situations is that we don't have to create all of those additional fields. We can say, hey, when the publish date is, and here we can choose from date actions and we can say, oh, it's tomorrow. And we can even add in additional days if we want to that. So SmartSuite doesn't make you create as many unnecessary fields just to be able to have logic inside of your automations. Now, while we do have the and the or logic, we don't have branching conditions inside of SmartSuite. But we do have very powerful actions. For example, we can find records by certain criteria, and then we can loop or iterate through them to actually have actions for each one of those records. We can delete records. That one we can't do in Airtable without scripting. We can merge records. We can do some more collaboration things like creating a comment or sending notifications. We can generate PDF records, which is pretty unique, and we can make those outbound API calls. We can do custom LLM prompts, and we have a variety of outbound integrations as well. This one is a tough one for me to place because I think their actions are a lot stronger than many of the other platforms that we've looked at, but it's missing a little bit on the logic side. And I think in the way that Airtable and Coda both have scripting or formulas, that this is something that SmartSuite could benefit from as well. So I would consider it on the cusp of S, but I think it's at an A tier for now. This is hard for me to enunciate given that the last one was SmartSuite. This is Smartsheet. Smartsheet is a little bit more focused on the enterprise. Their triggers are pretty limiting. We just have when rows are added or changed and when a date is reached. When it comes to logic, we can create conditions with and or logic, and we can create multiple branches for our actions. Within our actions, we can send notifications, we can generate a document like we did in SmartSuite, we can have approval processes, and we can update certain values. Interestingly, we can lock and unlock, so we can actually give security permissions essentially based on this automation. But the thing that doesn't work well here is that your scope is limited to that triggering action. You can't find records, you can't choose tasks somewhere else, you can't have this project over here that you update. It's all within that context of the initial record or row. So it's interesting, if you have really simple project management functionality needs, then some of the automations are great in the fact that you can do approval processes and you can generate documents. But when we compare it to the breadth of these other platforms and what we can do and the business logic that we can create, it's actually really weak. So for that reason, I am giving Smartsheet a D. Next up, we have the App Builder Glide. We can trigger from a webhook inside of our app. We can essentially chain together our workflows. We can trigger it from a Slack message. This is pretty cool that I haven't seen in other ones. We can trigger from an email. We saw that in Airtable, and we've got our schedule. In our logic, we have and or, and we can set up branching logic for our actions as well. And I think when it comes to actions, you simply can't beat Glide. So for example, look at everything we can do with our data. Yes, we can do standard CRUD stuff, but then we can actually interact with JSON. We can query the JSON, so we can structure the data how we want it. We can generate CSV files. Then we have an interaction layer where compared to all of these other platforms where it's just about the back-end data, we can do stuff in our UI. We can say, hey, click this button, and now we're going to show this certain screen, or open this modal, or scan a barcode, all of these different things that we can do inside of the user interface. Communication, we can send emails, SMS, dial phone numbers. We've got our call API. AI functionality, again, we've got that structured data. We can take audio and convert it to text. We can do documents to text. And integrations, you've got just a ton of options you can choose from out of the box. So Radar, for example, we were working on a construction project and we wanted to do some geocoding, and we could put in 2 different coordinates to calculate the distance between. I mean, really, there's a huge list. So Glide is definitely S tier, and if I had to probably pick one, this would be my go-to. Next up, we have the app builder Noloco. We've got our CRUD operations, including deletes. We can trigger this manually or with a comment added to a record. For our logic, it's actually under the actions area. We have this only continue if, and we can choose and or conditions. We also have the ability to loop through items in a list. They call this for each item in a list do. And for that, we can have different nested actions within that loop. We can send notifications. We can trigger a webhook. We've got user features like activating and deactivating users. We can do AI actions with ChatGPT. And so because we have solid business logic, we've got the outbound webhooks and some interesting actions. We're going to put this in the A tier. And the last one we have on the list is Softr. Interestingly enough, Softr just released their workflow functionality. So they went from 0 to all of what you're about to see in like a single release. So for triggers, Softr has some outside data sources, and then they have their own databases. So this is where you're going to see the CRUD operations. The apps themselves also have a couple different triggers. We've got our inbound webhooks, and then we've got one-time or recurring schedules. Softr's conditional logic gets pretty crazy. Not only can you have and or conditions, you can also have groups of conditions as well. So where you say where this is true and this is true and this or this is true. So you can get really sophisticated with both conditions and groups. You've got your branching logic. You've got a wait step. This is interesting if you're trying to build campaigns or something and you want to wait a couple of days. We've got our looping functionality to iterate through records. We've got our call API, basically our outbound webhook. We can run custom code in JavaScript or Python, and we can extract data either from PDFs or web pages. So I'm telling you, the fact that they built one of the most powerful automation engines and did it to catch up to everybody else in this single release is just crazy and unheard of. So absolutely, Softr belongs in this S tier as well. And there you have it. We have ranked these top automation tools. Now, if you're in the market for a project management or work management tool, you're certainly not going to evaluate it just on its automation capabilities. That's why we put together this video on our Software Finds YouTube channel to help you find the best system for your team.